Welcome to the Corporate Files, where business, technology, and innovation come to life. We uncover the stories behind the world's biggest companies, boldest ideas, and game-changing innovations. Let's dive in. Please subscribe, like, and share.
Welcome to this explainer. Whenever we talk about India's future, there's one specific year that absolutely dominates the conversation: 2070. Why? Well, because that's the exact year India has promised the world it will hit net zero carbon emissions. But that target, it's really just one single thread in a massive, incredibly complex tapestry. By the time 2070 actually rolls around, India's population is going to have fundamentally transformed, its economy could easily be one of the top 2 or 3 largest on Earth, and its role on the global stage will be completely rewritten. But if there's one thing you take away from our time today, let it be this: whether India arrives at 2070 as a thriving, clean energy superpower or an overheating, unequal giant depends entirely on the decisions being made right now, literally in this exact decade. The future is being built today.
Okay, let's dive into this. 2070 isn't just some distant, abstract point on a calendar. It's a really powerful lens. It's a way for us to explore the staggering scale of India's potential, as well as the immediate, just immense challenges it faces right now. It forces us to look past the daily news cycle and really understand the deep structural shifts happening within a nation that holds a massive portion of humanity. To wrap our heads around what this massive geopolitical shift actually looks like, we're going to hit 5 core pillars today: the 2070 benchmark, the demographic reversal, the economic reality, the net zero mega project, and finally, 2 futures for India. All right, kicking things off with section 1, the 2070 benchmark. This is India's biggest bet. Now, what's really interesting about this commitment is that this specific year wasn't just pulled out of thin air. Back at the COP26 climate summit in Glasgow, Prime Minister Narendra Modi committed India to reaching net zero carbon emissions by 2070. You might immediately notice that this is 20 years later than the 2050 target set by most wealthy nations and 10 years behind China's 2060 goal. The argument here is absolutely foundational to understanding India's whole strategy. India hasn't finished developing yet. The stance is essentially that a nation still working to lift hundreds of millions of people out of poverty shouldn't have to completely decarbonize on the exact same timeline as countries that industrialized a century ago, back when they were emitting carbon freely. It's an incredibly delicate balance between vital economic growth and heavy climate responsibility. Moving right along to section 2, the demographic reversal, or as I like to think of it, the quiet reversal. And this brilliantly illustrates a reality that actually catches a lot of folks off guard. We all know the headline that India just became the world's most populous country around 2023. But think about the trajectory. The United Nations projects the population will peak in the early to mid-2060s at around 1.7 billion people. But after that, it actually starts to decline. By the time our benchmark year of 2070 arrives, India will already be past its peak population, heading downwards to an estimated 1.5 billion by the end of the century. So, contrary to popular belief, India's story in 2070 is definitely not one of endless population explosion. The absolute secret to that dropping curve comes down to this number right here, 1.6. In demographics, a fertility rate of 2.1 children per woman is considered the replacement level, basically what's needed to keep a population perfectly stable. Well, India's fertility rate has already fallen well below that. Independent estimates place it around 1.6 to 1.7 as of the mid-2020s. This matters deeply because it means the demographic window, this golden period where India has a massive working age population ready to drive the economy, is closing, and it's closing rapidly. Just look at the staggering contrast between these two eras. Right now, in the 2020s, India is riding this massive demographic dividend. But because of that dropping fertility rate, projections suggest the elderly population could actually outnumber children as early as the 2040s. By 2070, India will be managing a genuinely old population for the very first time in its entire history. We're talking about pension systems, elder care, and healthcare infrastructure facing pressure at a scale no country has ever had to manage, simply due to the sheer hundreds of millions of people involved. Preparing for this isn't some distant problem, it's an immediate, present tense challenge. Which brings us to section 3, the economic reality. Going from emerging to established? Let's move on and see how this economic potential builds over the coming decades. Based on widely cited modeling scenarios, we see this incredible projection of India's per capita income rising from about $2,400 in the early 2020s, jumping to roughly $7,300 by 2040, and soaring to over $22,000 by 2070, all in today's prices. On paper, this is just wildly optimistic. It suggests that by 2070, India could achieve living standards roughly equivalent to where middle-income European countries are today. But remember, this assumes a steady growth scenario where the country successfully shifts its economy, builds the necessary infrastructure, and, avoids major global shocks. So, the really crucial point we have to keep in mind is that a massive total GDP does not automatically equal widespread wealth. The macro data creates this illusion of one India. Yes, India could very plausibly be the second or third largest economy on Earth by 2070 in sheer size. But it could achieve that while still having a huge chunk of its population that hasn't reached rich country living standards. There's severe regional inequality, with stark differences in development, urbanization, and aging between southern states like Kerala and northern states like Bihar. A single economic number for the whole country will always kind of mask these internal gaps. It perfectly highlights a vital distinction. Size and prosperity are fundamentally different measurements. India's ability to truly thrive by 2070 relies heavily on its ability to transition a massive workforce out of agriculture. The big open question is whether India can build real depth in its economy, moving beyond just being the world's IT back office and service provider, and taking the leap into high-value manufacturing, owning intellectual property, and driving groundbreaking innovation. That economic evolution is what will determine if this prosperity gap truly closes. All right, on to Section 4, the Net Zero Mega Project, the 2070 Promise. There is an absolutely fascinating tension at play here. Today, India is the third largest emitter of greenhouse gases in the world in absolute terms. Yet, at the exact same time, its per capita emissions, the amount of carbon emitted per individual person, are among the lowest of any major economy. This dynamic makes India's clean energy transition not just a critical environmental necessity for the whole planet, but literally the biggest infrastructure and jobs opportunity of the next 50 years. Whoever builds this new grid captures the future. It's as simple as that. So what does hitting net zero actually require? The scale is just hard to overstate. To meet the 2070 promise, solar and wind capacity must grow roughly 70-fold. We're talking jumping from around 100 gigawatts today to over 7,000 gigawatts. Coal use in power generation has to plummet by 99% by 2060. The entire economy's oil consumption needs to peak around 2050 and then fall by 90% over the next 20 years, all while rapidly scaling up cutting-edge tech like green hydrogen for heavy industry. If India executes this, it runs on clean power with a globally competitive green manufacturing base. If it fails, it misses its own deadline while still heavily burning coal. This leads us to our final stop, Section 5, Two Futures for India, the road ahead. Arriving at a thriving 2070 relies entirely on how India navigates the hurdles of today. There are 5 really high-stakes realities standing between right now and that future. First, India must maximize its temporary demographic window today to secure real productivity gains. Second, it has to execute that unprecedented net zero infrastructure build-out while still developing. Third, and this one is super urgent, climate stress is not some future risk, it's an accelerating present threat. Extreme heat waves, water scarcity, and monsoon disruptions are already threatening agriculture and city livability right now. Fourth, it absolutely must bridge those deep regional and social inequalities. And fifth, it has to make that incredibly difficult leap from low-value services to an innovation-driven economy through massive investments in education and research. But hey, it's not all doom and gloom. There is a super strong data-backed case for optimism here. India possesses immense built-in advantages. It currently has a massive, increasingly educated young workforce. It operates within a democratic system that, despite friction, allows for critical course corrections that closed systems really struggle with. Furthermore, India's already proving its capability by hitting its early renewable energy and emissions targets ahead of schedule. And crucially, it has a 50-year runway to execute this grand transition, which is actually a longer time frame than many other fast-developing nations have given themselves. So after all that, we are left with this one massive question. Which India will actually arrive in 2070? Will it be an aging superpower that's still struggling to catch up and grappling with extreme climate stress? Or will it be a genuinely developed, technologically advanced, clean energy powerhouse? The numbers, the demographic models, and the climate targets make one thing absolutely crystal clear. 2070 is not a fixed prediction. It's a horizon. And the foundation for whichever future arrives is being built by the choices, the investments, and the policies happening right now, in this exact decade. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.